Everyone, thank you for being at the PyLang 2 track. Our next speaker for today is Baldevia, and the title of her talk is Artistic Python, Mixing Python Programming with Fashion. So let's begin.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Maria Baldevia, and I like to talk about Python and programming and ways teachers can teach students how to program using unconventional ways. Today I'm going to focus on art and programming in the sense of fashion, utilizing electronics, and also some other microprocessors and microcomputers. This was actually inspired by Adafruit and Pimoroni, along with Instructables, the website that helps people create and make things with electronics and some coding. So last year I worked on this topic as well, but in the sense of music and programming. In Python, there is a music library called Python, which basically helps people create music and code using the Python syntax. So I decided to go ahead and explore other artistic ways that incorporates Python and see how they're currently utilized on the web. So thank you. Again, thank you to PyCon 8 and to the staff and team here for having me. So basically, we constantly talk about science, technology, engineering, and math. We always emphasize the STEM fields. But one thing that I think is missing in this dialogue is the concept of art. So here, if you are familiar with Python, I basically inserted art in the third place. And instead of STEM, if you print that, you'll get STEAM, or science, technology, engineering, art, and math. So here, who are art teachers or engineers or professors or teachers who incorporate programming in art? Does anyone here work or play with art in the programming sense or science at all? Well, hopefully that will change somehow, some way. May not be today or tomorrow, but eventually we'll see how many of the math libraries can actually help create some nice artistic work, especially if you utilize Jupyter. If you play around and spend some time, if you have time, go ahead and use some libraries to create some art. And if you like visualization, Bokeh Library is a really good library to play with if you want to create some nice Van Gogh-like paintings. I do not have that much time in my hands, actually. Okay, so thank you so much again. Learning to code, various ways to learn programming in different languages. Art and fashion, we'll talk about the hardware that's utilized in addition to the different types of fabric that various innovators are using in order to do e-fashion or wearable technology. Art and fashion programming, most of the information that's out there focus on the Arduino IDE, but slowly but surely there are organizations that are creating Python libraries that help with some LED lighting, so you can get creative with that, particularly out of the UK. And then I'll talk about some art and fashion online resources. You'll see links that I've posted on each slide as a source/resource where I got that information from. Any fashion designers here? Okay. In a recent research, Kaggle found that many people who are trying to learn embark on an online journey. They go to online courses, they go figure out a mixture of ways, whether it be meetups or buying O'Reilly books or some sort of books or having their friends teach them over the web. They do trial and error. I'm more of a trial and error person here and other. So who here relies solely on online courses for programming when you started off with this journey? Okay, what about books? What books do you utilize most of the time? I personally utilize O'Reilly if I can find the PDF version online. Okay. According to Kaggle, online resources that have been utilized are FCC, it's the top spot, Code Academy, Coursera, Udemy, Khan Academy, Pluralsight, edX, Udacity, Odin, Proj, and CodeWars. In addition to these tutorials or classes online, who plays games here, such as coding games for programming languages? Once. Anybody compete with each other online? I'm not very good. I usually just stick to Python. But I believe with coding game, you can compete using various languages. So if you're interested, CODIN game. Okay. So in the sense of fashion, I don't know if anyone here watched Mission Genesis a long time ago, about 15 years ago. It was a pilot program, but they had really amazing fashion wear. There's also Star Wars with really cool fashion drawings, but I'm not going to go that avant-garde today at all. I'm going to solely focus on the concept of LED lighting and connecting it to microprocessors and simple circuits. Because one, it's tangible. Two, it's been done. Three, I don't know if I could carry that much weird stuff on the airplane from the East Coast in America. So I just kept it really simple. I brought a little feather and a feather board from Adafruit and the little lithium battery. I'm really happy they were able to let me take it on a carry-on, because usually they say no lithium batteries, but it's below the band voltage. So there's a lot of things out there that can help you start on some sort of e-fashion or wearable technology project. It's affordable. There are things that are available on eBay for a cheaper value, and there's also things that are brand names such as Pimeroni out of the UK or Adafruit. And if you have a micro center here, there's a DIY section that allows you to basically buy these little parts. Most of the time, these are basically lightings. They have these little strings here. If you see that wonderful Cinderella-like dress, the t-shirt on the top uses very simple Neopixels that can be individually bought. That can cost, as basically for a pack of 20, I was able to get it for $4, or basically like £2 or €2. And then you have the dress underneath, and then you can create simple accessories using LED lighting. But please do keep in mind that when you do create these projects, batteries are needed. Some safety rules here. If you are under 12 years old, recommend you getting some batteries that won't hurt you. If you're an adult and you're comfortable with this 3.7 voltage, then it should be perfectly fine. But please find a safe way to actually insert it while you connect it to your circuit and LED lights. We don't want any accidents to happen. Now here, the whole concept of art and programming and electronics in the programming realm is DIY. It's do it yourself. There's no right way. There's no wrong way. There are wonderful sites such as Makerzine, Instructables, Adafruit, Learn.Spark. They help people like you and those who are interested in creating some of your inventions utilizing electronics and simple programming. If you're into Arduino, it's going to be perfectly easy because there's lots of resources for you there. If you strictly want to stick to a Raspberry Pi and utilize a Python syntax, it's going to be a bit tricky to get started, especially with the new Raspberry Pi Zero that came out a couple months ago. Who here is interested in DIY projects? I mean, it doesn't have to be electronics. It could be furniture. It could be cooking. What do you like to do? Explore. You like to build and fix things. I think I'm a good carpenter, but I'm actually not a very good one. As long as I connect the hinges and put lots of glue and it doesn't fall, I consider that a success. All right, so let's get into hardware. There's a lot of things out there that are small enough and cheap enough for us to play with. We have the staple, the Arduino board. We have the MicroPython, which is basically found in the microbit that came out in the UK. We have the Raspberry Pi 3, which is the B version that requires more power. If you don't want something that requires that much power, I suggest you get the Raspberry Pi version A. The 3 is the third generation. This one here has a lot of space. It's Bluetooth enabled. You can basically connect to your USB keyboard, USB mouse. It has an Ethernet as well that will allow you to connect to the internet. Now, these connections to the internet are extremely important, especially if you want to use the Raspberry Pi. You are going to need to find the IP address, and that is probably much more simple utilizing a Raspberry Pi 3 that has an Ethernet outlet. In addition to that, you have something that is, you have a micro SD slot, which is needed for you to boot and get the operating system involved. And then you have a video core 3D graphics capability. With a Raspberry Pi Zero, the reason why I like this a lot is because you can actually, it's light. Once you get things hooked up and you have a good source of energy, such as a lithium, a nice battery, you can sew it onto an outfit without too much weight. If you're brave enough, you can put together a nice little brooch and put it, wear it on a dress. It literally is about this big, and it's fairly cheap. On average, it's about $5 or about €3, or, you know, it's very cheap. I mean, I don't know what the system is out here, but I know out in the U.S. and the East Coast, the first one is $10, but the second and third ones increase in price. Originally, the whole Raspberry Pi microcomputer system focused on providing one microcomputer to each person, and that was their rule. But now you can buy multiple. So in order to kind of control the demand, they say, all right, you'll get the base price for the first purchase, but if you're going to get 2, 3, and 4 after that, it'll be a different price. But if you're getting started with e-fashion wear and wearable technology, particularly with the Raspberry Pi family, I recommend that you start off with the Raspberry Pi 3 before you embark on Raspberry Pi Zero, unless you're comfortable with getting the with booting up that hardware headless, meaning without a monitor, without a keyboard. It took a while for me to get there, but for the newbies, I suggest starting off with a Raspberry Pi 3. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with our first hardware, which uses the Arduino wearables. This actual circular hardware is a collaboration between Adafruit and Arduino. It's incredibly small. It's probably the diameter is probably smaller than this height. It's pretty amazing because you can sew it onto a dress. You can sew multiple things onto that. And if you create a circuit using conductive thread, you can actually line an entire dress with lights or with Neopixels and have some wonderful LED capabilities. So for this particular project, which can be found on the Arduino site, Project Hub, you'll need the Adafruit Gemma, which is that circular hardware right there, sewable Neopixels, which can come in a pack of 20, and all you need are scissors to cut them apart. I'll actually show you a picture. This is an old picture here. 3-ply stainless conductive thread and 3 AAA battery pack. And you'll need sewing needles, plain thread, and scissors. So basically, if you have a really small, simple circuit in mind and you have conductive thread and you can sew, you can pretty much make a very simple hoodie that lights up. Some people wear it under their shoes. This, yeah, we'll talk about this later. This is fun. All right, so other things you can look at that inspired this particular project, Adafruit.com. and then Instructables.com. All right, so experimenting with LED lights with a MicroPython board, which was the second hardware on my previous slide. We can actually test this out, and it's called the Disco LED, and here I chose, well, I had no option to choose because it is a MicroPython board, but Python syntax. Basically, you tell the LEDs that you connect that are on this particular micro board that's hooked up to the power to blink. There are 4 LED lights and colors, and basically you instruct it to go ahead and light those colors automatically. And then you actually program it to shut it off. So this here uses a Python syntax. I thought this was actually interesting because a lot of the code that I found weren't solely focused on Python. But again, as I mentioned earlier, slowly and surely there are organizations there that are utilizing the Python syntax for a lot of these fun wearable projects. Okay, so LEDs and Neopixels, why them? There is this, well, because they're light and they're simple. And technology nowadays allows them to be sewn onto fabric to work with conductive threads. And there's so much you can do with the programming language to tell it, you know, I want you to blink white. I want you to blink red. I want you to blink to music. If you want to make an ugly sweater for Christmas, you can do that now with all the Neopixels that are available, and it's cheap. If you want to go cheaper than Adafruit, you can probably go on eBay as well. But I found it to be fairly simple to purchase the hardware, to cut it up, to design it. I think the trouble that everyone will have, particularly the newbies, is the booting of the Raspberry Pi in order to do the programming. All right, so thanks to Adafruit, the first 3 pictures in the column basically all come from Adafruit. She created this. This is the flora. There's the RGB strips. There's the Neopixels that are individually cut up, but you can actually buy them in a pack. As you can see there, I have about 20. Bought that for $4. And then above that, you have a ring. You can make earrings out of that or accessories. It lights up. It's really nice and simple. Again, just find a nice battery energy source that doesn't weigh you down or burn you. Again, something light like this. If it's for a child, make sure to get actual AAA batteries that have been tested and market/industry approved. And on the far right is actually a dress that I'm working on. There are different ways you can incorporate it and embed it in an actual dress. So that's a single Neopixel that was sewn onto, it's a non-conductive thread. It looks like it's conductive and all magical, but it's not. I didn't have access to conductive thread, so I basically found something that looks like it and found a dress, a corset actually, and it's going to light up. So again, there's technology out there. Adafruit.com is a great source for that when you want to buy these accessories and hardware. One thing I forgot to mention is whenever you do these projects, it's really important to draw your circuit. And after you draw your circuit, make sure you troubleshoot your pixels. You don't want to sew an entire outfit and find out 50% of your pixels don't work because they got destroyed or burned. So make sure you go ahead and draw your circuit, design it, troubleshoot it using your breadboard or alligator clips. And then if they all work perfectly fine, go ahead and make the final move and sew them onto the fabric. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at some Python syntax here when it comes to testing out LED strings. You can actually do this once you get your Raspberry Pi. In order to do that, first you have to copy the image of the operating system that can work or is functional on a Raspberry Pi. And that operating system is called Raspbian, and the current version is Raspbian Jessie. A lot of people have had trouble, I'm assuming, because it was very cumbersome. So what Raspberry Pi Foundation did was come out with an SD that has the operating system already in it, which is called Network Out of the Box. Short, it's called Noob. So all you need to do is get the SD, put it into your, get the SD out of the adapter, put it into the Raspberry Pi, and then once you connect to the monitor, you'll be able to decide which operating system you want to install. You can install Jessie, or you can install the recent version before Jessie called Wheezy. So I recommend everyone to basically download Raspbian Jessie if you're going to start playing with the Raspberry Pis. So once you connect it to the monitor, you'll be able to see the operating system. You'll be able, after you install it, and you'll be able to start typing in code to test your RGB, your strings, your LEDs, your pixels, whatever it is that you want to do. And there are several libraries out there that you're going to utilize. So if you're going to play with Neopixels from Adafruit, there's a Neopixel library. A lot of the libraries and a lot of the scripting is going to utilize a library or a module called Time. And also Pimeroni came up with a library called Blinked for their Blinked products, which is basically a set of Neopixels that don't need soldering. Soldering is a problem of mine. I'm not a very good solderer, if that's what you call it. Who here solders and does it very well? Bless your hearts. So here we have the Raspberry Pi 3 and the Raspberry Pi Zero. The Raspberry Pi Zero is Wi-Fi enabled. It's much lighter because you have the micro SD, micro HDMI, micro USBs to connect to basically external devices that help with the keyboard and the mouse and the monitor. The Raspberry Pi, you have the regular size USBs and you actually have an Ethernet here, which makes it much more simple if you're getting started with the Raspberry Pi family. If you're going to get into e-fashion and wearable technology in the Raspberry Python realm, start with the 3rd generation. And then once you feel confident and you think you can actually boot up your Raspberry Pi headless without a monitor, without a keyboard, then go ahead and play with the Raspberry Pi Zero. On a side note, I found out how to actually utilize my Android phone as a monitor and take advantage of the Bluetooth to utilize a wireless keyboard and play with a Raspberry Pi Zero. But that's not necessary if you're going to do fashion and LED lighting. I just wanted to say that because I was very proud of myself. Okay, so again, the process here, if you want to get into e-fashion or with the Raspberry Pi products, you need to download the image of the Raspberry operating system for Raspberry Pi, copy onto an SD card. Usually modern Raspberry Pi products come with Noob nowadays, but if you like to start from scratch and you're really into the do-it-yourself mentality, there is going to be a blank SD card that will allow you to copy an image onto it and then boot up your Raspberry Pi. Once you boot up your Raspberry Pi, you'll be able to connect to the monitor and see everything, and then you'll be able to start coding. Now, a lot of tutorials don't tell you that you have to find your Raspberry Pi's IP address. So that's where getting connected to the internet, either wireless or through an Ethernet, is going to be very important. So before you can actually start coding, before you can actually start any of this fancy stuff, utilizing the Raspberry Pi family, it's important that you understand what an IP address is, why it's important to the Raspberry Pi connection, and why you need to utilize it and find it before you start coding. All right, so one thing about the Raspberry Pis is that there are Gpio pins for the Raspberry 3, which is great because you can put things on top of it, such as things like this. The Raspberry Pi 3 can actually allows you to get a feather top and just place it on top here. If you take a look at the Zero, one of the reasons why it's so light is because there's no header and there's no Gpio pins, which means you have to go embark in soldering. You're going to get those pins, insert it into those holes there, solder it, and pray that you don't ruin anything, because you don't want to spend another $5, $6 buying another board because you burned it while you were soldering, which, you know, it's happened several times on my end. You live and you learn. All right, so another library that you're going to need to use, particularly with the Raspberry Pi family, is the Gpio module. So the first line here, can everyone see that? It tells the Python interpreter that it will be using a library that will tell it how to work with the Raspberry Pi's Gpio pins. So, and the next line tells that interpreter that the time library is going to be used so that we can pause the script later on. So one of the things that you're going to need to include whenever you do some programming with LED lighting is that, one, when does it turn on? What are the rules for its blinking or rainbow coloring, or how often do you want it to pause? And 3, what are the rules for it to shut off? So basically you go through the process of setting it up, what is defined as a high, turning it on, and what is defined as a low, turning it off. Now this coding appears to be really simple, but I would highly suggest everyone read up on some electrical engineering books beginner books explaining, what a breadboard is, what a circuit is, what are these pin values. That would have helped me a lot. I thought, I can read, I can do this, I can do that, I have internet, it's fine. No, I suggest that you go ahead and read some basics, introduction to electrical engineering and getting acquainted with that if you're going to embark on this project. So lessons learned, Raspberry Pi 3 is probably the best route to get started because of the booting of the operating system. Also, you don't have to worry about whether or not you can boot your system headless without a keyboard or monitor. You have the Ethernet port there, you have USB ports there, you don't have to deal with micro SBs. Also, you have the header and GPIOs pins, meaning you don't have to worry about soldering, which is actually going to be important if you're going to play with lighting and placing it on top of the Raspberry Pi 3. Now, if you're comfortable with the Raspberry Pi products and you know how to solder and you understand how to boot up with Raspbian and Jessie, and you already understand the different types of adapters that you'll need, such as an HDMI, a micro HDMI to HDMI, or a micro USB to an Ethernet type of situation, then go ahead and go to the Raspberry Pi. Enjoy it. Next, the third one here is actually the logo from Pimaroni. I would have looked at their libraries and their GitHub repository first if I knew of them prior to me jumping on board to the Raspberry Pi products. So Pimaroni is based out of the United Kingdom. They sell Adafruit projects, Spark projects, lily pads, and all that wonderful stuff that constitute a DIY enthusiast. The thing here that's different is that they are so Python. Well, I think they're Python focused, as opposed to Adafruit, where I found a lot of projects that just focused on the Arduino IDE. And my first language was Python, and I still focus on Python. So something that comes at me with a Python syntax, I'm much more comfortable. And one of the things that I learned is if you do have a feather board and you do have a feather top here, a feather wing that you place on top of the feather board, always make sure you have some sort of energy source. It doesn't hurt to buy more than one. You can carry this. I kept this in my pocket. You can charge this overnight, and once it's adequately charged, you can basically disconnect, keep the battery there. It's light enough for you to sew on your back. If I had something like this and a bit lighter and I had a sturdy foundation, I probably would have made a brooch to put here or put it on my head. Actually, I advise you not to put anything on your head at the moment. I'm not an expert. I'm also not an engineer, an electrical engineer, so whatever I'm doing right now is purely on aesthetics and curiosity. But those are the major lessons learned. Don't buy the soldering kit if you're not comfortable with that yet. Start with a Raspberry 3. Get the feather heads that you can put on the GPIO pins on the Raspberry 3. Get the SD card that has the NUB, the network out of the box, implemented in it already, and have it installed to boot up your Raspberry 3 using Raspbian Jessie. Have a monitor. Don't rely on your laptop. Things just get much easier if you utilize your monitor, a separate monitor or a TV or something else. Yes, but don't play with a Raspberry Pi Zero yet. Go ahead and buy it because it's cheap. But when it comes to ease and confidence, I suggest you start with a Raspberry Pi 3 first. Get a bunch of Neopixels and LED lighting from Adafruit, and make sure to draw your simple circuits. Test out your drawing and your LED lighting before sewing it onto the dress. So that is basically my journey and my lessons learned while on this journey. Are there any questions regarding hardware, programming, or experience regarding this?
Any questions?
Thank you for your talk. Can you please repeat the name of the pepperoni?
Oh, Pimaroni.
Okay.
P-I-M-O-R-O-N-I. And they have a GitHub repository by that name as well. And a bunch of their modules that work with some of their products are hosted there as well. Yep.
Any other questions? All right. So thank you very much, Ria.
Thank you.